Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is ready to end the war in Ukraine through peace talks, while claiming Kyiv shows only limited readiness for dialogue. He also asserts Russian forces hold the strategic initiative and are advancing along the front line as Ukrainian troops retreat. US President Donald Trump says he does not rule out war with Venezuela, according to an interview with NBC News. He also signals more oil tanker seizures days after ordering a blockade of sanctioned vessels to pressure President Nicolas Maduro's government. EU leaders agree to borrow money to loan 90 billion euros to Ukraine for its defence over the next 2 years. They drop, for now, a plan to use frozen Russian assets after divisions within the bloc. Authorities say the suspect in last weekend's mass shooting at Brown University is found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators say the gunman, identified as Portuguese, is also responsible for killing an MIT professor 2 days later. Violent protests erupt in Bangladesh after youth leader Sharif Osman Hadi dies from gunshot wounds sustained in Dhaka last week. Authorities say media buildings are torched and vandalized as the interim government declares a day of mourning and urges calm. The US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is set to hold talks in Miami with officials from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey on the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire. A White House official says the meetings come as efforts continue to sustain the truce despite reported violations on the ground. Australia will launch a national gun buyback scheme after the mass shooting on Sydney's Bondi Beach last week. The move echoes tough gun reforms introduced after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre, as tributes are held for the victims of the tragedy. Staff at the Louvre vote to end their strike after 3 days of disruption, according to unions. Management says the world's most visited museum reopens as normal following the walkout. Australia will launch a national gun buyback scheme after the mass shooting on Sydney's Bondi Beach last week. The move echoes tough gun reforms introduced after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. We start this hour in Moscow, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, at his annual press conference, says that Russia does not believe Ukraine is ready for peace talks. He also emphasized that Russia is ready and willing to end the conflict in Ukraine peacefully based on principles he said he had set out at the Foreign Ministry in 2024. Putin also says that Russian troops have already entered the Huliopol settlement in the Zaporizhzhia region of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Russia have carried out a new exchange of bodies and dead soldiers. According to the Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky, Russia has handed over to Ukraine the remains of 1,003 Ukrainian servicemen and has received the bodies of 26 Russian soldiers from Kyiv. Joining us now is Gilbert Doctorow. He is a Russian affairs expert and he joins us live from Brussels. Gilbert, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Vladimir Putin in a marathon press conference at the moment. So I was wondering if you've been watching and what more you can tell us from it.
Yes, they were very kind to us this year, because in the past we would have to listen for 2 or 3 hours before Mr. Putin got questions that are of interest to the international audience. This year, they decided that the topics of how the war is going and how the economy is going are foremost in the thinking of the Russian people, the people who have written in 4 million different addresses to the Direct Line program, And so they started with that. Those two issues, of course, are virtually the only topics that would be of interest to us international observers. What I saw was extremely disappointing. You have mentioned correctly that Putin spoke about how they're close to capturing this town or that town. But at a level like this, when he's addressing the whole nation, nobody cares about whether taking one hamlet or another hamlet. We hear about the hamlets every day on Russian news. You expect the president and chief commander of the Russian armed forces to tell you about where the war is going, how soon, in what time frame does he expect Ukraine to capitulate? Nothing whatsoever. No big vision. All vision at the level of a platoon leader, not the leader of the national forces.
Gilbert, this is interesting. He said that he doesn't take responsibility for deaths in the Ukraine war, of course, and we don't know the exact figure of how many lives have been lost. But he said he didn't start the war. It seemed to be approached in quite a blunt manner. How do you think that's going to go down with the Russian public?
Oh, I think the Russian public will swallow it. The problem was that the whole speech is too populist. The speech was not addressed to serious, politically active Russians, and certainly not addressed to us in the foreign community, who want the big picture, not the little tiny picture. So he is missing a great opportunity to explain himself to the nation and to the world. And these remarks that you have cited are evidence of it. It's not up to the task.
Gilbert, of course, another huge development today, which he also spoke on. Putin, of course, warned of severe consequences if frozen Russian assets are used for Ukraine. Obviously, we didn't see that agreed to today. We did, however, see a $90 billion loan to Kyiv approved by the European Union. Can I get your thoughts on how or if that is going to make any impact on the battlefield?
Well, I comment on this with great pleasure. First of all, it will, of course, make a difference on the battlefield because failing that, Ukraine would go under financially. The country would be bankrupt in February, and they would have to capitulate. They will not have to capitulate for lack of funds. The European Union is providing this 2 years worth of cash to pay the Ukrainian government employees, to pay the pensioners, and to pay the soldiers, as well as to buy military equipment. I think it has to be emphasized that the Ukrainian government would collapse the next day when money isn't coming in. So it is vitally important. However, the major news of the day was the complete defeat of the President of the European Commission in her bid to violate international law, to trample on the rights of European citizens just to get the money stolen from Russia. It didn't happen. I am proud to say, as a Belgian citizen, that Belgians can stand tall today because Mr. De Wever, the Prime Minister of this country, saved Belgium and saved Europe. The problem, what you'll hear on Euronews, is that Mr. De Wever was forced down by pressure from Russia. Rubbish. He was forced down. He was forced to oppose the Commission's plan for confiscating Russian assets by self-interest of Belgians, not by Russian pressure, and self-interest of Europeans, because this Euroclear, if it were compromised by the plan of Madame von der Leyen, who seems to know nothing about economics or finance, she should stick with her gynecology. Anyway, this would destroy world markets. We have $43 trillion held by Euroclear, which would flee Belgium if they proceeded with this confiscation. And if they fled Belgium, then the dollar would sink like a stone, euro would sink like a stone, and the whole global economics would be in turmoil. That is what motivated the wise decision of our Prime Minister to stop von der Leyen, and she was stopped.
Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on over to some developing news from the United States, and police officials have discovered the suspect accused of perpetrating the Brown University shooting in a deceased condition at a local storage facility in the Salem town of New Hampshire. Officials have now identified the suspect as 48-year-old Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, who was a Portuguese national and had come to the United States on an F1 visa. Let's listen in to the details shared by the Providence police chief.
An individual was identified as Claudio Neves Valente, date of birth, and he was a 48-year-old man. He was a Brown student, he was a Portuguese national, and his last known address was in Miami, Florida. And I will tell you that he took his own life tonight. We have members of the Providence Police Department up in Salem, New Hampshire, and we also have the BCI unit. Obviously, the FBI and their evidence recovery unit is up there, so the process is being conducted as we speak.
Officials also report that the suspect had no current affiliation with the Brown University, but was enrolled at it in the early 2000s in a PhD program. Moreover, investigators have also added that the suspect appears to be connected to the fatal shooting of an MIT professor, Nuno Loureiro, which reportedly happened in Brookline on December the 15th. The mass shooting at Brown University last weekend killed 2 students and injured at least 9 others. We're now joined by Professor Madhav Nalapat. He's the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Can I first get your reaction and analysis to how long this investigation took, especially, of course, at a assumingly highly surveilled Ivy League university campus, and the fact that this perpetrator wasn't able to be taken to justice before he took his own life today?
Look, the fact of the matter is that the local police, working together with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they wrapped up the case very quickly, I must say, to their credit. And I think this seems to be a lone wolf shooter. This only shows the problem in the United States, which is very honestly very easy access to guns, and unfortunately very high rates of clinical depression, very high rates of that, and even young children are now getting treated for clinical depression. So this gentleman of Portuguese nationality, clearly he was in a very depressive and psychotically aggressive frame of mind, because the MIT professor whom he killed, they had been classmates together at some point, and he probably had a grudge against him from that period. Now, a man who is doing that to somebody who has got hardly a grudge for long back, I think it's no surprise that he traveled that 50 miles and went on a rampage at Brown University. Fortunately, only 2 died, and a lot more were injured. I think the problem in the United States, frankly, is that increasing joblessness, high inflation, easy access to guns, all this is producing a perfect cocktail for this kind of shooting becoming almost an everyday event in the United States.
Yeah, indeed, Professor Nalapat, over 570 mass shootings this year in the United States. Of course, this is only one of many. Do you think possibly this shooting will lead local politicians to act at a lower level, maybe possibly a state level? Of course, federal change when it comes to the Second Amendment has proved forever challenging in the past in the United States.
Look, the honest answer is no. The split between Democrats and Republicans is too deep, and very frankly, a tragedy like this will only lead to finger pointing and not into working unitedly. If you recall, Britain, the opposition parties and the ruling Conservative Party came together to fight the war against Nazi Germany, and it was a grand coalition that happened in Britain. I don't see that kind of thing happening in the United States in the situation it is in now. President Trump, unfortunately, has gone on a rampage. He is being very vindictive towards his opponents, just that they were vindictive towards him. He's paying them back in the same coin. But I think, as Mahatma Gandhi said, an eye for an eye only makes the whole world blind. So, very honestly, this is a symptom of a deep seated malaise in the United States society, and that malaise can only be cured by steady economic growth and by good education and by hopes of progression in one's career. As of now, nothing is there in the United States. This Portuguese national was obviously one of the very maladjusted people in the United States, and therefore I regret to say you're going to see many more shootings. I don't see these politicians coming together. There's nothing which is there to indicate that they ever will come together, because the clash is so deep now, and even within the Republicans now, fissures have erupted because Donald Trump has cut a lot of welfare. That is going to lead to even more
Yes.
even more disadvantaged people. So altogether, U.S. society is in for a tailspin unless something can be done in a remedial way. And personally, I don't see that in the immediate horizon. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat, for joining us here on NewsX World. We now move on and over to East Asia, and China says it is stepping up efforts to calm rising tensions between Thailand and Cambodia. Beijing says it is actively mediating to push both sides towards an immediate ceasefire. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has spoken with his Thai and Cambodian counterparts, and a Chinese envoy has visited both countries. Listen in to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Kun has said.
作为柬埔寨和泰国的友邻和朋友，中方高度关注当前柬泰边境事态，不希望看到两国兵戎相见，对冲突造成双方平民伤亡深感痛心，一直在根据两国意愿积极斡旋劝促，为两国对话创造条件，提供平台。昨天，王毅外长同柬泰外长通话，外交部亚洲事务特使再次赴柬泰两国穿梭调停，推动双方相向而行，尽快实现停火，重建和平。
The push comes ahead of a special ASEAN meeting in Kuala Lumpur on Monday. The border conflict is the worst in decades. Around 60 people have been killed and more than 500,000 displaced. Fighting resumed on December the 8th, breaking a truce earlier brokered by US President Donald Trump. We're now joined by Yoichiro Sato, a professor of international relations at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, joining us live from Bangkok. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. China here says it is actively mediating between Thailand and between Cambodia. How credible is Beijing as a neutral mediator in this conflict, and doing the, of course, traditional job which something like ASEAN should be doing right now?
Well, China has maintained a very cordial relationship with both Cambodia and Thailand. So Thailand has no reason to side with one or the other. However, China's motivation needs to be very carefully considered, because China has every reason to undo what Donald Trump was trying to do, and stealing the diplomatic credit away from the United States and make it China's credit is very much behind the China's offer.
Yeah, and if China does successfully broker a ceasefire here, what precedent does that set for Beijing in future conflicts to possibly mediate other regional disputes? Do you think that could be a new role for China?
I am skeptical that China will succeed, because there is so much stake involved, not so much China as a state, but the Chinese actors' involvement, particularly inside Cambodia. I'm specifically talking about those transnational criminal elements who are controlling various illicit businesses inside Cambodia, including the casinos and international fraud operations and so forth.
And Professor Sato, you're of course joining us from Bangkok, the Thai capital. What's the appetite for the conflict there? Of course, this goes back decades. What are people feeling?
Well, in Thailand, this is not new to be sure, but I think Thailand's taking advantage of this, the current conflict to divert the domestic attentions away from the various the domestic problems, including the poorly performing economy. So in a way, the Thai military is seeing this opportunity to consolidate its power and regain more confidence from the domestic population in the name of defending the territory, and also basically seizing this opportunity to put Cambodia in a proper place from the Thailand's perspective.
Yeah, and indeed, and going back to this update, do you think this episode signals a longer-term shift where Southeast Asian states increasingly look to China possibly, not ASEAN and not Western partners for this crisis management that is needed very much right now?
I'm skeptical of that. I think, as I said in the beginning, China's involvement is not out of the goodwill, but China has its own stake in the conflict, as well as in brokering the peace settlement between disputing parties. And most Southeast Asian countries are frustrated of their own inability to do so. The ASEAN as an organization especially has been expected to play more important role, but so far it has not been very visible and not very successful either. So I think ASEAN states are looking for opportunity to reassert themselves, but right now the big powers like the United States and China is coming in one after the other. So they're robbing ASEAN opportunity, but in a way it's ASEAN's own fault because they have not been very successful.
Professor Yoichiro Sato, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program. We now move on and stay in Southeast Asia for our next story. And Myanmar's military government says it has arrested more than 200 people under a new election protection law just weeks before national polls begin. The arrests have drawn sharp criticism from election monitors and rights groups who say the law is being used to silence dissent and block scrutiny. The junta plans to start voting on December the 28th, the first general election since the 2021 military coup that overthrew an elected civilian government. Authorities say at least 229 people have so far been charged, including activists, journalists, artists and social media users. Critics warn the vote is taking place amid an ongoing civil war, with major parties dissolved and many groups boycotting the polls. The military insists the election is for the people and not for the international community. Now, the US President Donald Trump is getting into the fusion power business through a $6 billion merger of his social media firm and Google-backed Tay Technologies. This has been announced just days after industry leaders met with US Energy Department representatives to urge federal funding. The all-stock deal announced is an ambitious bet on the power boom spurred by artificial intelligence data centers. It also adds to Trump's diverse ventures from cryptocurrency to real estate holdings and mobile services. Trump has 114 million shares in Trump Media, roughly 40% of the company. In the new merger, his ownership stake would be roughly 20%. US Representative Don Beyer, a Democrat and advocate for fusion, said on X that the deal raises significant concerns about conflicts of interests and avenues for potential corruption. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.